Hello and welcome back to the UCLA Bruins Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Ferguson, writer for UCLA on SI. Today we're going to be taking a look at Nico Iamaleava's expectations entering the 2026 season under Bob Chesney and offensive coordinator Dean Kennedy. But before we get started, I want to thank everyone right now who is listening, Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube. It all means a lot to me. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Obviously, Nico Iamaleava did not have the best season last season under, Tim Skipper, Jerry Neuheisel, and Deshaun Foster for the first 4 games of the season. His expectations were set a little bit high, I will admit, right? Coming off of a college football playoff appearance with Tennessee. Obviously, a lot of people thought he would be a complete program changer. And while there is truth to that, especially looking into this season and maybe beyond, if he decides to stay with UCLA after this season, I think Nico Iamaleava should have a great season with the Bruins in 2026. Last season, he had 1,900 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And he really showed flashes on the ground that made him UCLA's best player as a whole. He had 505 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. He was the Bruins' leading rusher, which probably won't be the case this season, but knowing that he has that skill in his back pocket can only mean good things for the Bruins in 2026. Obviously, Bob Chesney has done a lot to kind of build around him. 41 transfers in the portal. We had 6 receivers come in, and obviously Wayne Knight, who is going to be a game changer for UCLA as a whole. The Bruins did not have a running game last season. It was kind of split between a couple guys, Anthony Woods, Jalen Berger, Javian Thomas, Anthony Frias. None of them had more rushing yards than Nico Iamaleava last season. But with Wayne Knight, I feel like that changes a lot. It's going to take a lot of that burden off of Iamaleava's plate, and we could see him be a better passer, especially with Dean Kennedy in there. He had Alonzo Barnett, who had a monster season for the Dukes in 2025, was a big reason for them making the college football playoffs, and they also went toe-to-toe with Oregon. So I think this staff can manage a Big Ten team, and that's going to be helpful for Iamaleava. Well, do I expect him to have a Heisman caliber season? Not necessarily, but I think he will win UCLA a lot of games. But looking at all the factors that will contribute to this, it looks really good for UCLA. I mentioned earlier Wayne Knight. I think his rushing ability will, again, take off a lot of that load for Iamaleava. He's going to have time now. UCLA did prioritize, the offensive line. And I think that'll just be good for Iamaleava because, as we saw last season, he was under pressure. And for that reason, it caused him to run the ball a lot more. A lot of drawn-up quarterback plays were also involved in that because he just did not have time to make a pass. And when he did have time, he didn't have the firepower to necessarily capitalize on it. When you kind of look at UCLA's receivers last year, it's not that solid. Quasi Gilmore, I think he had 500 rushing or pass or. Geez, I messed up that bad. But he had like 500 receiving yards that season. I think he had a few touchdowns, but overall, he was a very quiet number 1 option for Iamaleava. When you look down, Rico Flores Jr., he also left the team this offseason. I think Mikey Matthews will stick in, but he probably will have a really small role, especially with how much talent UCLA did bring in. And then Titus Moiko-Atamilala, he was kind of a disappointment. He was a senior. We thought he would have a really good season for the Bruins. Being that go-to number 2 option, but he just wasn't there for the Bruins. He did have a 100-yard game, I believe, against Maryland or a team like that, but still, now Iamaleava has some weapons to work with. For example, Leland Smith, 6'4" from San Jose State with track-like speed. I think he will be a huge target for Iamaleava. Iamaleava loves to take long shots. We tried to see that against, Quasi Gilmer. There was a few long shots. Rico Flores, I believe, had a long one, and so did Titus Moiko-Atamilala. With that being said, I think, especially with Leland Smith, it's going to open up a lot more things for Iamaleava. When you kind of look at the play calling that he had to deal with last season, Jerry Neuheisel, again, I think he's a decent offensive coordinator, but he was coming in as a tight end coach, so he didn't have that experience to really, or that confidence, I should say, to kind of draw up those long balls that we could have saw Nico Iamaleava really capitalize on. But that just was not the case last season. But again, Leland Smith is going to be an elite deep threat, 6'5". He's going to make those contested catches. And we know Iamaleava is capable of throwing the ball in places where only the receiver can get him. And again, We didn't see that, but that could be easily, or we didn't see that last season, but that could be easily written off due to a kind of not so confident play calling. As we saw kind of as the season came to an end, he was really not throwing past, the first down mark. It was those short, check downs, which I don't think that is because Iamaleava lacked the talent. I think it was just a confidence thing for Neuheisel. He didn't want to be the guy who would drop a very ambitious play and it get picked off and it looks bad on Iamaleava and himself. But I think Dean Kennedy, with the experience that he brings, he's not going to be scared to kind of dial that up. I think Alonzo Barnett was great with the deep ball. We saw a lot of plays, Landon Ellis, to name one receiver who was able to be very good for the Dukes last season. He's going to be a big playmaker for Iamaleava this season. He was the leading receiver for the Dukes, and he's entering a system with UCLA that he is very familiar with. That being said, I think he will have a lot of action in this season. And like I said, Leland Smith will be good, but Aiden Mazzell will also be a massive player for UCLA. He was a 4-star transfer according to 24/7 Sports. And I honestly believe, that track-like speed, he has dealt with injuries, but I still think if UCLA can, draw him up right, I think he will be a massive player in 2026. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, for UCLA. Obviously, we had Brian Rowe from South Carolina, players like that who are really going to make a big impact for UCLA. They have a receiving room to really, stack the odds against the other teams, really stretch the field. Leland Smith, 6'5", he's going to absolutely tear up the red zone because of his, frame. And again, I kind of spoke a little bit about Wayne Knight and what he could really do for the Bruins. He had 1,300 rushing yards last season with the Dukes, which was more than UCLA's running back room combined. I think with his impact, he'll be able to really take the next step and revolutionize UCLA's offense. And I know that's a big expectation for Wayne Knight, but again, he is a game changer for UCLA. He's going to completely change that offense. He's not going into a system where he does not know the offensive coordinator. Dean Kennedy knows exactly what he's getting with Wayne Knight. Sorry, a lot of W's there. But still, I think with that being said, I think the play action will also be a huge part, because we saw last season that teams really weren't biting for the play actions. They're not really scared that, Javian Thomas is going to run for a 20-yard rush, right? Or something like that. Not a slight to Javian Thomas. He's a great season. It was just a bad season for running backs as a whole, but still, it was really hard for UCLA to get that run game and to pose that threat on the ground. With Wayne Knight, that opens up. And we could even see Anthony Woods. Anthony Woods had a lot of good runs last season, but now with Wayne Knight kind of breaking down that, defensive line, wearing down the other team, I think Anthony Woods is also going to be a very acceptable threat for teams to worry about as well. That being said, Nico Iamaleava is going to have time to really open up the offense. He's going to have play action, deep threats, even those slot receivers are going to be huge for the Bruins as a whole. With that being said, let's go into kind of his expectations for the 2026 season. I think for sure he passes over 1,900 passing yards. That is a very bad season as a passer. I think he gets closer to, the 3,000 mark, maybe even like 3,000.5. Right, that's going to be something that is going to be within reach with this new system, along with the weapons Nico Iamaleava has now. And there will be some growing pains at the start, so I could see Nico has a few interceptions to start the season. I think he will probably match his 7 interceptions, which in itself is not that high, but still I think he is going to struggle at first with that new offense. And there are some teams who could really disrupt UCLA's passing game. Oregon, Michigan, USC are all teams who could probably pick off Iamaleava, especially if, those growing pains do kind of persist later in the season. But that being said, I think he is going to probably have around, that 20 mark in touchdowns. I think his rushing numbers might go down, but to kind of sum everything up for Iamaleava, I think he's going to have 3,200 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. I think that is a good number. And if he decides to leave after that season, I won't blame him. Again, I think UCLA will have a lot of success, so his stock will be back to where it was when he was with Tennessee. And then you also got to add in, his rushing. I think his rushing will go down because, like I said, he's going to have time to make throws. A lot of his runs came off of, when they were under pressure. So I could see 300 rushing yards, maybe. Again, I know Alonzo Barnett last season with the Dukes under Dean Kennedy had a good rushing season, but still, I think Iamaleava is a better passer when he wants to be, and he just can run as a product of his raw athleticism. But I still think he will have a few rushing touchdowns. He had 4 this season. I think next season he will easily surpass, 7, 8 in that range. I think that is a very fair take when you kind of take a look at, Iamaleava's build, 6'6". I mean, he's like a baby Josh Allen. I mean, that might be setting the standard a little high, but he has the frame to be a very, scary quarterback, in those 1st and 5. We saw how good Fernando Mendoza was, at the goal line, those 1st and goals from the 5. I think Iamaleava will be able to fit that mold well. But yeah, that's all I really have to say today. I think Iamaleava is going to have a great season as a whole. This will be a turning point in his career as a Bruin. And honestly, he could, enter the draft next season. That is not out of the picture. But if he decides to stay, I think he will be even better, in that 2027 season. But again, all I had to say today, thank you so much for tuning in. And I'm your host, Andrew Ferguson. And as always, fours up and have a good day.